Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of the Urge Artifacts. Today we have a special episode for all the Horus Heresy fans. I will be doing my complete ranking of the 54 main series Horus Heresy books, starting all the way from number 54 down to 1. Now this video is going to be 1 hour long. I'm going to spend 1 minute per book, and during that minute I'm going to give my pros and cons of the books, my likes and dislikes. I'll go through my favorite character of the book and my favorite moment of the book. So it will be really quick per book, but this is going to be my longest episode ever, an hour long. Now, I will preface this by saying I'm very generous with the Horus Heresy series. I loved it from start to finish. Even the books at 54 and 53 and 52, I do like many aspects of it. I did not dislike completely any one book, but obviously there's going to be some that I have more criticisms of than others. So if you're expecting a lot of hate along the way, that's just not my style. These minutes will be very quick and to the point. I know this will be a long video, but I've gotten feedback from some of you guys on YouTube that this might be a good format to listen while you're painting your miniatures, driving in the car, or whatever. So feel free to listen rather than watch. And remember, this is my humble opinion on all the books. I expect a lot of people to view the books differently than me, but feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments, what you agreed with, what you didn't, and I'm always down for Horus Heresy discussion. But let's not waste any more time. 54 Horus Heresy books from start to finish. Let the galaxy burn. Let's go. Alright, so at number 54, the last place novel in the Horus Heresy series for me, there is Born of Flame, an anthology of Salamander's stories. Now, the main issue with this is that all of these stories had been released prior, some of them even up to 4 times, and so when this came out it was very frustrating because I'd read everything before, so it offered no value to me. Some of the stories themselves are pretty good. I really like Sons of the Forge, Scorched Earth, and even Promethean Sun, which was very early on in the series. But as a whole, given where it was released and, how I enjoyed it, I didn't enjoy it at all because I had read everything before. So for those reasons, I had to put this in last place of all the books. It was just a very big buzzkill. And, nothing against the Salamanders, but that's pretty much it. So book 53 is Mark of Calth, and as a heads up, the first 14 ranks on my list are all going to be the anthologies. It was really hard for me to separate them out over the single topic novels. But Mark of Calth, though some of the individual stories in here aren't too bad. I liked the Athame background story. I liked Unmarked as an update to Old Pearson's travels, but it kind of fell right after a bunch of really good books in a row and was kind of like, we're going back to Calth, and it was kind of like a letdown at the time. I remember distinctly feeling that way. So this one always left like a bad taste in my mouth, even though I thought some of the stories were really spooky. I like Calth. I like a lot of what was going on there, but overall this was just a letdown story, so I had to put it really low on my list at 53. So the reason I have The Burden of Loyalty down here at number 52 is similar to Born of Flame. A large portion of this book had been released previously, notably Wolf King and Cybernetica, 2 limited edition novellas, and in general I'm not really a big fan of Mechanicum type of stuff. This isn't all Mechanicum. There's a variety of stories in here, and I actually really like some of them. I really like the Perpetual story by Dan Abnett. I liked finding out about the background of the Adeptus Mechanicus in the Binary Succession, and I really liked Ordo Sinister, and I thought that little story in the Webway introducing that Titan Legion was really cool too. But in general, this was just like a book where it was like, hey, there's some good stories in here, but they weren't all real connected, and at the time it was another letdown after some big books had been released right before this. So number 51, Legacies of Betrayel. Now this book has one novella in it, The Brotherhood of the Storm, about the White Scars, and then a bunch of little short stories in it. Many of these stories had been released digitally beforehand, so at the time of reading it, I had already come across some of these stories. But basically, you have a lot of check-ins with some of our favorite characters: Cypher, Bjorn, Karn, Lucius, Ahriman. So it keeps the pace moving, but there's no real connection to this book. You know, it's just a bunch of random stories that some are good, some aren't that great. I really loved The Butcher's Nails. I love War Master. But in general, this is kind of just like a mix of stories and nothing very memorable when looking at a lot of other books in the series. So number 50 is The Silent War, which is an anthology focusing on all the secret missions that Malcador is conducting with all his secret agents. So, like some of the other anthologies, this book has a lot of different characters in here. We'll get some really big fan favorite characters like Loken featured in a lot of the stories. You have Sigismund in a lot of these books. And then you'll get some lesser known characters like Helig Galar of the Death Guard is in this a lot. And though at the time these characters aren't a big deal and it's kind of like not that exciting when you're reading it for the first time, Helig Galar, for example, shows up a lot in the Siege of Terra. So I'm one of those readers that really does like every morsel of information. So I enjoyed this book, but, you know, there wasn't a lot of big climactic things going on. So, you know, it's fairly low on the list due to that. Continuing on, we have The Age of Darkness at number 49. Now, this anthology starts off a little bit slow with the first couple stories within it, but then it really heats up. We get some introductions from some very prominent characters, such as Reviel Arvida in Rebirth, you know, an awesome Thousand Sons character. We get Barbius Dantioch in The Iron Within. We get Corswain in Savage Weapons, which also has a great Primarch duel between the Lion and Conrad Kurz. I really love the Little Horus book in this one. So, you know, about half the stories in this anthology are great. There's not a real connection between everything in here, so it doesn't have that like overall theme so much. But this anthology really hits in a lot of ways, so I have it about midway through my anthology list. At number 48, we have The War Without End, and this anthology has stories without end. I believe there are 21 different stories in this book, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but at the time when it was released, it came right after the book Deathfire, which was a grind, and having all the different changes of paces and different characters and different plot lines, I really enjoyed at the time. Plus, many of these little stories are like crucial little pieces of information that either precede some big novels or come after some big novels. So I like that depth of the lore. There's a lot of good ones in here, but with so many to name, I can't really go through them. There's a cool short story with Angron killing off the remainder of his loyal World Eaters on Istvan, and that one probably was the most poignant to me and stood out. Alright, at number 47, we have The Primarchs. Now, unlike the previous anthology, this one only has 4 main stories, so they're all pretty long, they're all pretty meaty. You have The Reflection Cracked, which is a wild ride of a story, but it has all the Emperor's Children's prominent characters and captains in it. Feet of Iron is about Ferrus Manus, and that one's a little bit slow, so not the best there. But then you have the novella The Lion, which is really good and has a very prominent moment in the books, as well as the Lion fighting a Lord of Change, which is always awesome to see the Primarchs fighting greater demons. And then you have The Serpent Beneath, which is a really unique and cool book about the Alpha Legion. So overall, I really liked the depth of each individual story in this one, and that's it. Now at number 46, Tales of Heresy, the first anthology released back in 2009. Half of these stories I would say are okay, they're not bad, but the other half are amazing, so let's focus there. You have Blood Games, which is the custodians protecting the Emperor, a really good story. Then you have After Deshea, which is Karn and Angron meeting for the first time right after Angron's been teleported upon the Conqueror. And I also believe that's the first time we see in a flashback the Emperor fighting in the Crusade, which is described really awesome. And then the Coup de Grace, which is The Last Church by Graham McNeil, with the Emperor talking to the last religious leader on Terra. Just an epic story and universally loved. So, though this one wasn't the best overall of the anthologies, it had some fantastic stuff in it. Number 45, Eye of Terra. Now, to be fair, I probably should have put this one lower on my list because the majority of the short stories are below average to average, but there are two really good ones that really boost it up for me. One being The Wolf of Ash and Fire, which is depicted on this sick cover art of the Emperor and Horus fighting side by side. The other is Aurelian, which is a novella about Lorgar, kind of going through his journey in the Eye of Terror. I really like that story, even though I don't like Lorgar. He always interests me in the books. And The Wolf of Ash and Fire is just fantastic. You get to see Crusade era Emperor fighting alongside the Luna Wolves and just kicking a lot of orc ass, and it's just really awesome. So for those two reasons, I put this one kind of in the mid-level of my anthologies. Number 44, Heralds of the Siege. Now, of all the anthologies, I felt this one was perfectly placed. It comes right toward the end of the Horus Heresy, and at this point we knew the Siege of Terra series was coming, and I thought all these stories really built up well leading into the Siege of Terra. You have the really good Now Peel's Midnight book by John French. You have The Board is Set with the Emperor and Malcador playing regicide right before the traitors are coming to Terra. And then overall, not a lot of other good stories within this one. They're not all great, but the location in the book order was really good, and I was like pumped up reading this. So I think that made up for some like average stories within it. So overall, Heralds of the Siege, a really good anthology and perfectly placed. Now the final four anthologies all have very focused topics, starting with Corax at number 43, which essentially collects all his content, aside from the novel Deliverance Lost, into one anthology book. I think the highlight of this anthology is Wergeld at the end, which kind of culminates everything. It's a pretty tragic tale because Corax was on the verge of being able to rebuild his legion right after it got decimated at Istvan III, if it wasn't for the Alpha Legion intervening. So here you see kind of like his descent and spiral, and though he keeps fighting this awesome guerrilla campaign against Horus and the traitors, there's only so much he can do. So I thought this collection was just really good overall and kind of connected well. I read all these stories as they came out, and I really liked the culmination. At number 42, we have the Garro anthology, and just like Gav Thorpe did with Corax, James Swallow does the same with Garro, having written all of his novellas and short stories. Now, most of these stories I had read or listened to as they were getting released, but it was nice having them all collected in one big anthology. Garro has some really cool interactions throughout the Horus Heresy, whether it be in the Flight of the Eisenstein or rescuing Loken from Istvan, and any of the other things that he does for Malcador. He's just a really well-written and well-thought-out character. Now, the funny thing was I put this one at number 42, and I didn't even realize that this was the 42nd Horus Heresy story released. So that's something that I'm kind of finding out right now, so kind of funny there. But Garro at 42. Number 41, we have the Shattered Legions Anthology. And though the Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard are not my favorite legions to read about at this point, I felt this anthology was very coherent, and all the short stories really flowed like a novel, so it was enjoyable to read in that way. Medusan, which is the first novella that starts off this book, is really good. Obviously, Shadrach Medusan, an awesome character that does a lot in the Horus Heresy to slow down the traitors. But then it also ends with the Seventh Serpent, which is a great Alpha Legion story, which also features our great characters from the Sisyphean, most notably Sherokin, who's a badass, and he fights Alpharius in this book, and nothing more needs to be said. So awesome moment, good overall book, and this one comes in at number 41 on my list. At number 40, the last anthology, Shadows of Treachery. Now, not a lot of stories in this one, but they're almost all great. Prince of Crows will start right at the top. Prince of Crows by Aaron Dembski-Bowden. Awesome book about Sevatar. Just fantastic read. Then you got the Crimson Fist with the Retribution Fleet battle between Perturabo and Alexis Pollux, which is another really, really good novel, even though it's very frustrating at the end. The Dark King and the Lightning Cower were originally released on CD, both really good. Getting into Rogel Dorn's head. And then you have Raven's Flight, which is kind of Corax getting hunted by Angron on Istvan, but that's a really good one too, that was also released by a CD. We even get a taste of Hastur Sejanus in Death of a Silversmith. Really, really good, and my number one anthology. At number 39, we have Nemesis, my lowest ranked of the standalone Horus Heresy novels. Now, I did find enjoyment in this book, like I did for all the books in the series, but the book is kind of broken up into two distinct parts, one being like a cool murder mystery plot, the other being this all-out assassination attempt on Horus with every type of assassin that there is. So I enjoyed the two parts of the book, I just didn't enjoy the flow of it. It probably would have made better sense to be like two connected novellas. And it's kind of tough to switch completely to an Assassins-based book from all the regular Space Marines and Primarchs and so forth. That being said, my favorite character was the Eversur Assassin, the Garantine, and my favorite part of the book was actually when he goes full kamikaze mode and kills multiple Space Marines in really awesome fashion. Alright, number 38, we have Deathfire. Now, this book was pretty slow. It's mainly focused around the Salamanders, though you have some of the Primarchs at the beginning because it comes off the heels of the Unremembered Empire. But for the most part, this is like the Greek Odyssey through space. So it's just like one big trip trying to bring Vulkan's quote-unquote dead body back to Nocturne. Now, there was some parts that I really liked about this book. I would say the part that I liked the most was when they were in the warp and there was the little girl demon, and that whole scene was very horrific. The Salamander's characters are pretty generic, even Numion. They're not bad, but generic. So my favorite character in this book was Narek. He always is great in any book that he's in. So overall, Deathfire, just kind of a pretty slow addition and doesn't really stand out. Number 37, we have The Outcast Dead, a book that gets a lot of hate, and some of it's understandable, such as the whole timeline with Magnus breaking into the throne room and the naked world eater killing a custode. If you put some of those things behind, this is actually a very enjoyable read. It's really cool getting the Thunder Warriors on Terra. The Crusader host is a pretty neat mix of characters. We also get introductions to Nagasena and Z-Mang, which become very big characters throughout the rest of the Heresy. Downside is Babu Dakal. We never see him again in the Heresy, which is very disappointing. I would say my favorite scene of this book is one of the Thunder Warriors, Gota, like taking on 3 or 4 Astartes. I believe he kills one of them, so that was pretty badass. I liked this book. It just doesn't compare to some of the many other big boys on the list, but by itself, it's not that bad of a book. Number 36, we have The Furious Abyss. Now, this is another book that gets a lot of hate, probably because the plot and story itself is very unbelievable. You know, classic book of a bunch of random space marines thrown together to overcome overwhelming odds, which they do at the end, and it actually is a very important thing that they do. I think a lot of people that dislike this book just see it for what it is, being very unbelievable. That being said, I enjoyed this book. I love the characters. I love the group. My favorite character in this book is Motep, 1000 Sun. He also has my favorite scene of the book, which is this badass scene of him fighting a demon in zero gravity in space. Really cool. So overall, I enjoyed this book. It has a lower place on the ranking, but it's not a bad read. Very fun, though its characters are very minor to the rest of the Heresy. At number 35, we have The Crimson King, a long-awaited sequel to a higher book on my list, 1000 Suns. Now, this is one of my favorite legions. Magnus is one of my favorite Primarchs, but I was pretty let down with this book, mostly because the plotline was just a little too wild. There was crazy stuff going on in the warp, which I usually like, but in this case, it was just maybe a little too crazy. Personally, loving Magnus, I thought it was tough to see him so fractured with his psyche, and there were just so many repetitive parts with that. I did like all the characters in this book. Ahriman has a lot of good parts. Hathor, Matt, and Lucius's plot is pretty cool. Once again, very frustrating about what could have been, which is the tragedy of the 1000 Suns. I thought some of the battles with Magnus's shards were really cool between them and the Loyalists. So there was a lot in this book I liked, but unfortunately down at number 35 on the list.
So at number 34, we have Titandeath. Admittedly, I'm not as much into the Mechanicum or the Titans as the Space Marines, but I had heard a lot about Beta Garmin when this came out, and I was looking forward to that. Now, I did enjoy learning about the background of the Titan Legion Solaria. I thought they had a good flashback in the beginning of the book. And likewise, I liked reading about Princeps Hartek and Legio Volpa, especially the relationship between him and Esha Mohani from Solaria. Their dueling plots is really engaging throughout the book, and I especially enjoyed Hartek's descent to chaos. He's a bad dude, but he really gets it rough by the end. Favorite moment of the book would definitely have to be Sanguinius's first time beheading a Titan. I think that surprised everybody when this happened, and ends up happening many times more in the Heresy. At number 33, we have The Damnation of Pythos. So this is another one of those books that's kind of standalone, came out of nowhere, and kind of caught readers off guard. That being said, I found it very enjoyable for kind of like the creepy horror book that it was. None of the characters are very memorable. It's just basically a group of shattered legions from the Veritas Ferrum, which we have read about this point, but the true enjoyment of this book comes from like the whole descent to madness as the progression goes along. Lots of chaos going on in this book, lots of horror, like I said before. This book does serve as a prequel to the later book Ruinstorm and some 40k stuff, so there's a lot of good connection there if you get to that point in the Heresy. But overall, very surprisingly enjoyable book, even though it took a lot of people off guard. The demon at the end is pretty wild, and that's probably the best part. At number 32, we have The Descent of Angels, the first of the Dark Angels books. And this is another one that took a lot of readers by surprise. You know, we were coming off the peak that is Fulgrim and the whole Istvan atrocity and all the books that went along with that. And we take it back in time to these two kids getting raised on Caliban, and that's what I really like about the book. You see through their eyes their promotion to Astartes and the whole process that goes through that, their trials to be inducted into the Astartes. I love the character of Luther. He's probably my favorite character in this book. You get to see, the relationship with the lion, and I just thought this was a really good book to show us like how everybody becomes the Astartes. And so that's what I really liked about this book. It's unique, not up there with my tops in the series, but very unique, and that's it. Keeping it with the Dark Angels at number 31, we have the next book in their series, Fallen Angels. Now this book progresses from the first one. I think it's about 50 years in the future. So we get to follow the same characters of Luther, Cypher, Zahariel, the Lion, etc. Now there's two main plot lines of this book. One with the Lion, fighting on, some planet, and that plot line's okay. It ends with the infamous action of him giving Perturabo siege weapons, which will be used much later on. Very foolish line. The better plot line is the one on Caliban, where we get to see Luther's falling to chaos and rejection of the Emperor and the Lion. And there's a lot that goes on here, but it's really cool learning the lore of Caliban and seeing how Luther's becoming anti-Imperium.
Number 30, we are completing the Dark Angels trilogy with Angels of Caliban. Yes, I have them all in a row. This one I like the most because unlike the first two, where the Caliban plot I think is far superior, in this one I think they're, the two plot lines are both about even. I might even say the Lion's plot is a little bit better. On Caliban, you have Zahariel, Luther, and Astellan doing a lot of politicking, and that's really cool. But where this book shines is all about the Lion versus Kurz. Match number 3, they had a split in their first two battles, but this one we get a clear victor, and it goes to the Lion. He hunts Kurz down. They have a pretty badass fight. My favorite part of the book is the Lion just breaking Kurz and dragging him back like a carcass to Guilliman and Sanguinius. People like to hate on the Lion and say he's not loyal, but loyalty is its own reward. At number 29, we have Vengeful Spirit. Now, this book is insane. There's so many things going on, so many different characters and subplot lines, and it's basically a book about a giant invasion on the world of Moloch, so Horus can find his way to get ascended to the power of the Emperor. Now, the best parts of this book are the grand scale of the battles. If I had to pick a favorite part, it would probably be right in the beginning where Horus, Fulgrim, and Mortarion fend off the 3 Thunderhawks in the assassination attempt. Now, it's very hard to pick a favorite character because there's so many different plot lines going on and you really can't latch on to one person. I did appreciate when the Knight Commander Raven denied Fulgrim. That was very unexpected. But this book might be a little too everywhere, and that holds it back from being in the top ranks. Now at number 28, we have Deliverance Lost. The Raven Guard don't get a lot of screen time in the Horus Heresy, mainly because they get massacred at Istvan, but this book is all about them and their rebuilding of their legion. And it's pretty frustrating because of what could have been. Fomegon did not taint that Genesteed. The initial Raptors were awesome, but then it becomes pretty tragic after that. Corax really shines in this book. He's a great leader despite everything he's went through with his legion. You do get a lot of his internal thoughts throughout the book. If I had to have a favorite part of the book, it's probably all his conversations with the Emperor from the moment he meets him as a young Primarch all the way throughout the book. I thought they were very insightful. This book doesn't blow you away in any one aspect, but it's a very solid book and very insightful about Corax and the Raven Guard. Now we are at number 27, the halfway point, with Fear to Tread. Now I was super pumped for this book, and it kind of met my expectations at the time. Sanguinius was always my favorite Loyalist Primarch. I was a little let down by how wishy-washy he was in this book, especially after losing to Kabanda the first time. That being said, the fight scenes were great. I want to say my favorite part of the book is the second battle where Sanguinius 2v1s Kyrus and Kabanda.
But I have to save my favorite part of this book for when Horus peels Erebus's face off at the very end and says, "Let them see you how you really are." That was definitely the best part of this book. So overall, I was a little let down by the first focus book on the Blood Angels, but we do get to see them shine later on in the series, especially in the Siege of Terra. Number 26, we have The Flight of the Eisenstein, the fourth book in the series. Now this is a Death Guard focus book, but more so a retelling of Isstvan 3. Now I personally like seeing a plot from a different perspective, so I really enjoyed this. I can see where people don't like that, but this book goes through the background of Mortarion purging his legion, all the way through Isstvan 3 and to Garro delivering the news to Rogaldorn about Horus's betrayal. This also marks our introduction to Nathaniel Garro into the series, and you can really see why he's so esteemed by Mortarion despite being loyal to the Emperor. My favorite character in the book is Solon Decius, featured right there on the cover. He gets inflicted with Nurgle's rot, and I really loved reading about his resilience that he showed. I thought it was great writing. And though he ultimately succumbs in the end, I really respected his fortitude. At number 25, we have Pharos. And I would say the overall plot of this book is okay. It's cool learning about the Pharos on Sotha. Where this book really shines is the characters and some really awesome scenes. You have Sanguinius and Kurz having one of the best dialogues in the whole series, as well as a really cool fight. Of course, we have Dantiok and Pollux and their very brotherly relationship. Speaking of brothers, I thought Kelenkyr and Kelenvar had a great plot line and really cool relationship. Kelenkyr is a real sadistic SOB. And I really found myself liking Gender Scrivok in this book and was glad they kept him in future books. Of all of them, Maricus the Guardsman was my favorite. Fighting with his platoon against the Night Lords, overwhelming odds, and dying valiantly with a smile on his face was just fantastic. Now, number 24, we have the Tallarn anthology. Now, the novella Executioner is a really cool read, very claustrophobic, very intense, but the main novel, Ironclad, is where we will focus. Now, this book is basically about Perturabo trying to find this weapon on the planet of Tallarn so he can have an advantage over the other traders. He's really not on the same page with them, and I really like him for that. All the plot lines mesh really well in this story between the Imperial forces, the Assassin, the Alpha Legion, and of course the Iron Warriors. Argonis gets introduced in this story, and he becomes a great character for the Sons of Horus. He's an emissary trying to demand Perturabo stop fighting at the planet. Glad that the Iron Warrior that found the Black Oculus denied it, because it was basically just going to be demonic corruption. And the most powerful scene is at the end when Perturabo is forced to kneel to Horus. At number 23, we have Ruinstorm. Now, this is the final book in the Imperium Secundus arc, but is also a sequel of sorts to the Damnation of Pythos, where the book's antagonist, the demon Madal, is the ultimate antagonist in this book and is revealed much later. So this book basically follows the three Primarchs, Sanguinius, Guilliman, and the Lion, in their journey to get to Terra. They're journeying through the warp, and throughout this plot, they're each dealing with their internal struggles, chief of which is Sanguinius deciding if he can defy fate and not die to Horus. I found this book to be very fast-paced, and I really enjoyed that. I really liked the absurd grandiosity of some of the warp depictions in this book. It was pretty wild, like really out there. And my favorite part of the book comes at the end, where Guilliman Superman punches a greater demon in the face. At number 22, we have Old Earth, which actually came right after Ruinstorm in release order of the series. Now, Vulkan, recently resurrected, comes to a purpose that he needs to get to Terra, and this book is essentially his journey there. Now, throughout this book, Vulkan has some really badass battles. He goes through Kamara and fights the top level Mandrake of the Dark Elder. He fights a greater demon of Nurgle. But my favorite parts of this book is how it intersects a lot of other plot lines. We have the intersection with Shadrach Medusan and the Shattered Legions, where he smashes their attempt to bring Ferrus Manus back to life. And then at the end, his journey intersects with the war in the Webway, and you get to see the Emperor from a distance clearing out the demons from the Webway as they make their escape. I really love how this book interacted with that, and how it ends with him, the Emperor. Number 21, we have Vulkan Lives. This is the first of the 3 Salamanders-centered books, and this book basically follows 2 main plot lines. The first of which is centered around John Grammaticus and the Fulgurite weapon. This has other Shattered Legion characters. It has Erebus, it has Barthusa Narek in it, and it's enjoyable. But the second plot line with Vulkan on Kurz's flagship and constantly getting tortured and dying in so many terrible ways, that is really a wild plot line. Very good, very sadistic, and it really leads to a great payoff in this book, where it comes to my favorite part and many people's favorite parts, the quote, "And it is also a hammer," when Vulkan finally gets his hammer and beats the shit out of Kurz after everything he's done to him throughout the book. Okay, at number 20, we have Prospero Burns. So this book I was pleasantly surprised about. I originally thought it was going to be a retelling of the Battle of Prospero, following up from A Thousand Suns, but it actually was more of a background and description of the Space Wolves, who really hadn't been covered much in the Horus Heresy up to this point. The plot unfolds more like a mystery, following Caspar Hauser, the Remembrancer and main character, and through that you get to learn a lot of interesting background about the Space Wolves. There are a lot of entertaining and insightful moments in this book. I would have to say my favorite moment is at the very end when Bear is revealed to be Bjorn. Didn't see that coming at the time, and then it's all revealed. This book really turned me around to the Space Wolves and added a lot of depth to both Leman Russ and their personas. At number 19, we have The Unremembered Empire, and this was the ultimate Nexus book, bringing in plot lines from many previous stories, including Fear to Tread, Vulkan Lives, Pharos, the Dark Angels, etc. It also goes heavy into John Grammaticus and the Perpetuals, and Dan Abnett really did a good job bringing so much in. He wrote it very well. There's also a nice map in the beginning, and this is not something that's very common in the Horus Heresy series. It really helped tracking Conrad Kurz's terrorizing of the city. There's a lot of great Primarch fights in this book, including the Lion and Guliman 2v1 versus Kurz, as well as Vulkan versus Kurz again. But my favorite fight is between an Ultramarines chapter master, I believe it's Freitas Augustin, real asshole during the book, goes against Conrad Kurz in kind of like this one-on-one overwhelming odds last stand. That was badass. At number 18, we have Galaxy in Flames, the third of the original trilogy and the culmination of Istvan III. This book really brings me back to the good old days of early Horus Heresy, with some of our most famous characters like Loken and Garro and Saul Tarvis, Lucius, etc. Very nostalgic because back then we were all experiencing the heresy breakout for the first time. I can kind of remember the stress and fear while reading this book as all of our good protagonists are being hunted down and overwhelmed by the betrayals going on. So many great characters in this book, but I would have to put the top spot with Saul Tarvis. He leads the defense against Istvan III. He gets the message to Garro, and at the end he punches Lucius in the face and wins their little one-on-one duel. So good. Mechanicum comes in at number 17, and this is a book that goes way back to 2008 and is a book that's always stuck with me throughout reading the Heresy series. This is a book that has a lot of mystery to it. Who is the real machine god? What's the story with the dragon buried on Mars? What's the Caliban project? And then obviously everything that's going on with the Heresy of Horus. I knew very little lore about the Necrons or the Satan, and I remember this book kind of sparked me going down that rabbit hole. And this book was also my first big introduction to how Knights and Titans fight and how their leadership works, etc. I enjoyed most of the storylines in this book, and if I had to pick a favorite part, it would probably come right in the beginning when the Emperor shows up and says, "Machine, heal thyself," thus starting the alliance with Mars. At number 16, Wolfsbane, and the hype was real when this was coming out. I mean, just look at this cover. You got Leman Russ and Horus, who's already ascended, battling it out. Now, I remember being very excited with this book. We all knew Leman Russ wasn't going to win, but, you know, how close will he get? I mean, he's the Emperor's executioner. He's defeated a lot of Primarchs in the past. So the lead up to this fight was great, and the fight was surprisingly even, with Leman Russ even having the opportunity to kill Horus and not doing so, which was very frustrating at the time. But he did wound Horus with the Emperor's spear, which comes into play in future books. So was I a little frustrated that the Space Wolves were leaving Terra? Yes, I was. But did this book make up for it with Leman Russ having this awesome climax of his Horus Heresy plotline? Yes, it definitely did. At number 15, we have Legion, another book early on in the series that introduced so many new fascinating things, some of which were very mind-blowing. First, it was our introduction to the Alpha Legion, the arguably most mysterious Legion, so it was very cool learning about them, as well as their mortal guardsmen characters. There was a lot of good characters in this. Then we had the introduction to John Grammaticus, who obviously is with us all the way to the very end of the series. This is our first perpetual plot line. We also get introduced to the Cabal, which was brand new at the time. And then finally we get the huge reveal of the twin Primarchs, Alpharius and Omegon, and then their decision a couple years before the Heresy to side with the Cabal to ensure Horus wins so the Emperor's dream is fulfilled. So many great reveals. At number 14, The Buried Dagger, the final book in the Horus Heresy series. And I must say, throughout the series, the Death Guard were my least favorite Legion, Mortarion probably my least favorite Primarch. That being said, I loved this book. I'm actually surprised it's only 14 on my list. This book is broken up into two different plot lines. The current one with the Death Guard becalmed in the warp, and the one in the past which goes over the background of Mortarion and the formation of the Death Guard. There's a lot of stuff with Typhus in that, and that's the plot line that was really enjoyable to me and I found fascinating. My favorite part of the book is at the end, where Mortarion is submitting to Nurgle, and it's overlaid with him pledging loyalty to the Emperor in the past. I just thought it was written so well, and it was so tragic, and it was just a great ending to this book. And number 13, Angel Exterminatus, and this is our first detailed introduction to Perturabo and the Iron Warriors. And fun fact, Perturabo ends up being my favorite traitor Primarch in the series. This book is what started that. Though the plotline is a little wacky and not my favorite, the three groups of characters that we follow in this book are all great. You have the Iron Warriors with all the characters which we learn later on in 40k. You had all the Emperor's Children's, which came from the Fulgrim novel, which is very high on my list. And then you have the crew of the Sisypheum, with the standout being Sherokin. There are two standout moments in this book. The first being Sherokin owning Lucius in battle, not once but twice. And the second, of course, being when Perturabo smashes Fulgrim's face into his toy Warhound Titan. At number 12, False Gods, the second book of the Horus Heresy and the middle book of the original trilogy. This is the book where the famous saying, "Fuck Erebus," came about, and is also marks the official fall of Horus to Chaos. I really like this book because the character list was relatively small. We essentially just have the Lunawolves / Sons of Horus, the Remembrancers, and Erebus as main characters in this novel. And we really get to spend a lot of time with them. I really felt they did Horus's fall fantastic, from his charismatic best of the best persona in book 1 to when he gets into a weakened state through the machinations of Erebus and Nurgle, his weaknesses being exposed, especially his pride. This book was a perfect setup to Galaxy in Flames when everything opens back up again. At number 11, we have Scars. Now, the White Scars were another legion that had not been covered barely at all up until this point. Now, I had read the novella Brotherhood of the Storm previously, which gave me some good background on Shibin Khan and Torgun Khan, the two, I would say, main characters of this book. This book also introduces Yasigi, the chief Stormseer of the White Scars and longtime friend of the Khan from Chondax. This book is great at keeping you on the edge of what the Khan is going to do and why he's going to do it. I mean, we all know that the Khan ends up with the Loyalists, but you get to learn a lot of his reasoning for that and motivations. There are a lot of good Primarch interactions in this book, especially when the Khan and Fulgrim debate who would be the better swordsman, also between the Khan and Horus, and it's really well written how the Khan deals with the traitorous elements of his legion. Now, I had to make sure Horus Rising made it into the top 10, and I remember way back when I was reading Gaunt's Ghost for a bit, and I started this book, and I knew what Space Marines were, I played the game, I knew lore, but I'd never read books about them, and it was a big contrast. You can really see the power levels between Space Marines and these great Remembrancer characters in this book, as well as the magnitude of what a Primarch truly is. Horus is written so well in this book, you can really see why he is the first among equals, but all the characters are. You have Loken, you have Tarvis, heck, I even loved Lucius in this book. I love the portions of this book on murder and with the Interrex. And as you read, it's really easy to put yourself in the character's shoes as they try to figure out what are demons, what is chaos, and if it's real or not, or it's just a big lie. We have finally made it into the top 10 with Slaves to Darkness at number 9. Now, this book is all about Horus mustering the traitors before they're pushed to Terra, but he is wounded from the events of Wolfsbane, so it really falls on Malagurst and some of the other top sons of Horus to do so. Now, the cover art of this book made me really excited to have a traitor-focused book, and I was looking forward to a lot of Primarch interactions between them, and it definitely didn't disappoint. You have Lorgar going to get Fulgrim, and of course you have Perturabo going to get Angron. And this was the book that officially put Perturabo in my top Traitor Primarch spot. My favorite moment was him and Angron's fight, and him just lecturing Angron and calling him weak for falling to chaos. I thought that was so sick. We knew Lorgar's plan wasn't going to work, and at the end it was really cool seeing Horus in full command of the traitor forces. At number 8, Praetorian of Dorn. Now, Rogel Dorn was a Primarch in the early books, always came off as kind of like a sourpuss, an asshole, and this book really flipped my whole mindset on Rogel. And I only continued to like him more and more as the series goes on. I mean, this guy's got the most pressure on his shoulders, and he's been tasked to do one thing, and that's defend the Sol System in Terra. In addition to Dorn, though, my favorite character of the book is Archimus, the captain of the Huskarls, and who's referenced in the name of the book, Praetorian of Dorn. He's tasked with finding out what's going on with the Alpha Legion operatives, and this is a very Alpha Legion centered book. They're great as well. The plot line with Salonius, who's really Alfarius, is really good. The best part of the book comes at its shocking conclusion. At number 7, Know No Fear. And there is no book in the Horus Heresy written like this. This was a page turner. I don't think I've read any book besides maybe Saturnine that I finished as quickly as this book in the series. The overwhelming intensity in which Lorgar attacks Calth and the Ultramarines was just crazy, and Guliman is forced to respond in a way I don't think any other Primarch could have. Me and my cousin, when we read this book, we used to always talk about how Horus used to always say it should have been Sanguinius, for War Master, but we started saying it should have been Guliman because he is just a beast in this book. And that leads me to my favorite moment, is when Guliman is out in the void. You see the picture right here, and he is just punching off Wordbearers' heads with his power fist. Ananid Thiel is an honorable mention for best character. Such a good book. Now we flip it right back to those Wordbearers with the First Heretic at number 6. I'm getting to the area now where all of these books could be considered to be number 1. This book is just so well written that you could take a Legion and Primarch that is universally despised and make the book so enjoyable. From the very beginning of the book, where Lorgard's Legion is forced to kneel and his city is destroyed, to midway through the book when he's monologuing, "Aren't my hands golden too?" There's just so much depth portrayed in Lorgar's character that it's hard not to connect with him. The breakout and best character in this book is Argol Tal, and his relationship with the demon Ra is just awesome to read about. And of course, the memorable moment at the end when our silent custodian speaks for the very first time and throws his spear at Zaphon, saying, "I've always hated you, Zaphon." At number 5, we have The Path of Heaven, and this is like one of those movie sequels where the first movie was great, in this case Scars, but the sequel is even better. There's a very suspenseful plot in this book with the White Scars trying to fight their way to the Sol System, and within that there's so many good character arcs. You have Yasigi and Arvio Revita, you have Shibin Khan and Torgan Khan. I even liked the Eidolon Emperor's Children's parts a lot. There's this one Palatine Blade, Cario, who has a great little subplot where he's resisting a demon. I thought that was really cool. And then at the very end, there's a very emotional moment when Yasigi sacrifices himself so that the Khan and all the White Scars can escape. That was a big character death and really hit hard. This book had it all, a lot of emotion, a lot of great fights, both hand to hand and in the void, and really left you on the edge of your seat the whole time. At number 4, Fulgrim, and at one point my favorite book in the series. This book covers an overlap with Isstvan 3 and then really covers Isstvan 5 really well. You get to see the whole downfall of the Emperor's Children through this book. It's similar to the Sons of Horus in the first 3, but a lot faster paced. My favorite character in this book was actually Solomon Demeter. I was really sad that we didn't get any future books with him. He's the main point of view character for a lot of it. Really love that character, as well as all the Emperor's Children captains and so forth. They were all good. Obviously, all the scenes with Fulgrim kind of breaking downward and downward throughout the book was an excellent example of Primarchs falling to chaos. Graham McNeil really depicted the shocking betrayal at Isstvan 5 so well, and its culmination between Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus in their final battle. At number 3, Betrayer. Aaron Dembski-Bowden does it again, and just like in the First Heretic, he takes the Wordbearers and another legion I don't really care so much about, the World Eaters, and makes them the most fascinating to read about in this book. Let me quickly try to rattle off all the great things we get in this book. We get Argol Tal and Karn and their Brofest. We get Lotera Saren and her awesome introduction as flag captain of the Conqueror. We get one of the sickest battles of Primarchs with Guliman versus Lorgar, and then Guliman versus Angron, and the speeches that are given in that fight, and the resulting apotheosis as Angron as a demon prince. And then finally at the end, ADB really stabs us in the stomach with the Erebus and Argyltal betrayal. Such a good book, and probably in everybody's top 3. At number 2, The Master of Mankind and ADB Does It Again. Now, I am a huge follower of the Emperor, I'm not going to hide it, so I was so excited when this book came out, and it also delivered in giving us great insights to the Emperor's psyche. He talks so much between or within the dreams of his custodians in this book, so you get to get a lot of his views on how he sees the heresy and what his grand plan was. The custodians also shine in this book, especially in their battling in the webway, which is just brutal, but it also shows how amazing and brutal fighters they are. Favorite character in this book is probably Arcan Land, and I really liked his relationship with the Blood Angel Zephin. And my favorite part of the book has to be at the end when the Emperor enters the webway and the sun rises and flaming swords all the demons. That finally brings us to 1,000 Suns, my favorite book in the Heresy and number 1 on my list. This book was just so tragic, and I must admit, at the end of the book, I was very much in the Magnus did nothing wrong club. In many ways, he was clearly the most powerful Primarch, and he just wanted knowledge, and he wanted to use that to enlighten humanity, and then ultimately warn the Emperor of Horus's betrayal. But he did not understand the error of his ways. When the one being that is smarter than you warns you not to use your powers anymore, you should have listened. Ahriman is also an awesome character in this book, and I really loved reading about all the fellowships of the 1,000 Suns and their relative powers. It might not be everybody's favorite book, but this book, more than any other, left me feeling more emotionally spent, but in all the right ways than any other book, and is number 1.
Alright everybody, thank you for watching or listening. I hope you enjoyed that. As I said in the beginning, please give me your thoughts. What did you like? What did you agree with? What did you disagree with? And if you're interested in me doing another video on the Siege of Terra series, please let me know. I have thoughts of maybe doing that, and also the Primarch series. I've read all those books, and just waiting for the Horus one to come out. As always, thank you for watching. Keep on collecting,